The Comics Kid 2099. Trek or Wars?
Wars for me.
Everyone's going to answer.
Wars for me all the way. Because I've never seen it. Nothing against Star Trek, because I just don't watch it, but Star Wars is such a part of my geekdom that I would, even if I got heavily into Star Trek, I'd always be a Wars guy.
Have you seen the new Star Trek movie?
I have.
You have?
Mm-hmm.
And you probably enjoy it because it's Star Wars, the Star Trek version.
I enjoyed it, but I don't know. It wasn't... that movie didn't have memorable characters for me. Like, I didn't even remember the names of some of them after I saw it, but, you know.
Yeah, like, I'm just saying that a lot of people that aren't Star Trek fans like that film because it's so much like Star Wars.
Yeah, like, I don't know. It was an enjoyable experience, but it wasn't like one of those movies like Star Wars where I'm going to keep watching it over and over again.
Yeah, I completely understand that.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of either. Like, I don't really know much about Star Wars, and I don't know much about Star Trek, but if I had to pick one, I'd like Star Trek, because I did like the newest film that they made. That was a really good movie. I do agree with Dan said that it's not really memorable after you watch it. You know, it's not really a movie I want to watch more than once. But I did enjoy it when I did see it, so I'd have to go with Star Trek.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping the sequel is just as good.
I'm in, like, first of all, I like the new Star Trek film, but very much like how Dan said, oh, you like Planet Hulk, I've read the book, so I can't like it. Well, because I know a lot about the original series, even though I haven't seen much of it, there's a lot of mistakes in that new film that you didn't notice. Because you didn't know what to notice. There are things they did wrong that are so wrong, and when I seen Red Letter Media's actual video on it, he pointed them all out. And he says he likes the film, but it's like a popcorn film. It's a dumb film.
Yeah.
And that's what it's meant to be. But Wars all the way, because Star Trek is like I'm probably the closest one to being a Trekkie here.
Mm-hmm.
But Star Wars is fun, and it's not science fiction, it's science fantasy, and that's what I love about it, because it's not about, like basically, Episode 1 did what Star Trek did, but bad. Because Star Trek is all about sitting around, talking about the problem, and at the very last part of the movie, fixing the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you like that kind of stuff, you're not going to like Star Trek. Star Wars is all about getting your hands dirty and blowing up things.
Yeah, exactly.
What's not to like about that? Okay, next question. Sci-fi or fantasy?
I'm not really opposed to either of them. Like, I like both of them, but if I had to choose, I'd probably choose fantasy, just because I love the kind of sword and sorcery, knights and stuff like that. Like, I love that kind of setting. Especially in video games. That's probably my favorite thing to play in a video game, is a fantasy setting. I've read some fantasy novels, like I like Lord of the Rings and stuff like that to a certain extent. It's not my favorite fantasy thing, but I like it. But yeah, I'd choose fantasy over sci-fi. I do like some sci-fi things, though.
I'm not really into the sci-fi genre, but I have seen, like, I don't know if Alien is considered a sci-fi film, but that's one of the ones I like. That's a great film. Fantasy, like, what's considered a fantasy movie? Like, give me some examples.
Well, fantasy is a very broad term, but I'll give you a definition of what it is. It's basically where, it's basically, like, there's sword and sorcery, but it's basically where there's magic, where there's things that don't happen in the real world.
Oh, so yeah, I do enjoy, like, Harry Potter. Is that considered
Absolutely.
fantasy? Yeah, I enjoy all the Harry Potter films, so...
I think Harry Potter's actually called high science fiction, or it's very, very core, like, it's your traditional type fantasy, because it has an entire world, like, it's not just about one event happening.
So I guess I'm a fan of both, if, I've seen both, and, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm a fan of both, and it's really hard for me to think about this. I'm just gonna say I'm a bigger fan of sci-fantasy.
Like Star Wars, like a hybridization of the both, of two of them.
Yeah, because I think that I think that you can do more stuff that are more fantastic with that. When you're not bound by the simple rules, like when you're not bound by the by medieval times, and when you're not bound by actually having to explain stuff, you can tell better stories.
Mm-hmm. As long as you don't use that as a crutch.
Yes, absolutely. But I honestly think you can tell better stories because, like, I'm a big fan of, like, Stargate. That's your traditional sci-fi. It's very much like people will argue that it's not as like it's more unrealistic than Star Trek, and I'm like, no, it's not. Watch it. They actually have scientists working on that show, and they're dealing with real world things that are evolving us today, things that are relevant to today, because they're not that far removed from reality, because the show starts out in modern day, 94, and something happens where we can now travel to other worlds. What would that be like? How would that change humanity?
That is a cool premise.
So it's more personal than Star Trek could ever be. Am I right about that?
Well, I don't know. I've never seen Star Trek, so I can't really say.
Well, Star Trek is about people 200 years in the future or 300 years in the future interacting with species and actually having a network. Like, that's a lot harder to relate to than people today. Like, people just stepping out into that world, if you know what I mean.
I don't know. I think the trials and tribulations of human life are kind of universal, and it doesn't matter what time period you're in. But I don't know. I'd probably have to see both of the shows. It probably would depend on how the characters were written for me, personally.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, they both do characterizations of characters. Like, the characters aren't as important as the stories. Essentially, like, they both have good characters, but it's more about making good stories than trying to make, like, the most realistic characters, if you get what I mean by that.
Yeah, I understand what you mean.
What's the most underrated comic you've ever read? Dan?
Underrated comic. I've read a lot of Spider-Man, obviously, and that's where most of my underrated comic reading comes from, because I've read a lot of his history that people don't necessarily remember as, like, standout things. One of my favorite Spider-Man runs is Peter David's run in Spectacular Spider-Man in the 80s. I say that a lot, but I mean, it's just such a good run. And Peter David's one of my favorite writers. He just tells some great stories there, and it's not really collected anywhere. I really think it should be. I think I collected one of his stories, but I think the whole run should be collected somewhere. And then also another Spider-Man run that's pretty underrated is, again, on Spectacular, J.M. DeMatteis's run on Spectacular. That's a great run, too. That's where Harry Osborn becomes the Green Goblin again and dies, and it's a great story.
If I would have to say most underrated comic that I've read, I'd have to go with the Crow graphic novel. I mean, that's technically a comic book, and not a lot of people have read it. They mostly just seen the movie. But the comic book is really nothing at all like the movie. I mean, yeah, there's some traits that's in the film, in the comic, but the comic book is just really good. It goes more in depth of the relationship between Shelley and Eric, and it's just, I'm hearing that the reboot is going to go more into the graphic novels. So yeah, I'm kind of on the fence of looking forward to it or not, because if they're just going to remake the original classic Crow film, because that's one of my favorite films of all time, if they're just going to remake that and just, you know, do a shot-for-shot remake like they did with that fucking crappy Psycho film that they made, the remake, then it's just going to be another shitfest, in my opinion, because all the sequels suck. Hopefully they just go to that book and just, you know, try to be just as good as the book, in my opinion. I do, however, think the movie that they made is better than the book, but if they're going to go more into what the graphic novel is, I'm all for it. So.
Okay. Well, I don't have a good answer for this question, so I'll give a bad one.
Mm-hmm.
Witchblade.
I have a good answer for you, Mark.
What?
Spider-Girl.
That is, yeah, Spider-Girl. I was going to say Witchblade just because not a lot of people know about it. Probably not a lot of people in the mainstream, but it is a very big one. Spider-Girl is a good answer, too.
Yeah, that's just one that popped into my head, because I know you like that so much, and not a lot of people know about it, and it's great.
Well, it's not that it's underrated, it's that it's not mainstream.
Right.
Same thing with Witchblade. Witchblade is not underrated. People who know about it, and it's got a very big following. If you have 150 comics, you're big.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can we agree on that?
Yeah, I mean, your sales are strong enough that you've been able to stay alive that long.
Yeah. Spider-Girl had 100 comics, then died, and like a month later came back with another 30 run.
Yeah, she's had a bunch of series. I think she's had like 3 volumes so far.
Yeah, that's pretty strong.
No, yeah, it is, definitely.
So they're not underrated characters by any stretch of the imagination, but more people should know about them.
Right. That's kind of the approach I took to the question. Maybe I answered it wrong with my answers, but...
Well, I'm just saying, well, you had better answers because you read more. I just don't really have, like, I can't list, like, arcs that are underrated, so characters were the best I could come up with.
Mm-hmm.
And to that, the characters I think are underrated are, like, Witchblade and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which they're not. But when you think of comics, nobody thinks of those characters.
Right, that is true.
Even though they're not considered underrated. If you call the Turtles underrated, then I don't think you know the definition of the word. Which Witchblade should get a film, but and Spider-Girl should also get a film. Or a TV show.
I'd be up for that.
Yes. If you don't want to do Spider-Man as a TV show, do Spider-Girl. Similar.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
I think the Spider-Man fans would watch that, do you?
I'd watch it. I think Spider-Man fans would too.
And it's a teenage girl. Hey, you have how many shows out there like about that?
There you go. Perfect.
Okay. Last question. Most overrated comic you've ever read?
Oh, that's almost harder. Batman Hush, I feel like that's not as good as a lot of people say it is. Just because of the fact that they introduce Thomas Elliot in that story, and then Hush pops up, and they're like, who is he? I wonder who he is. Oh, it's Thomas Elliot, the character we introduced. I don't know. It seemed kind of like the mystery was kind of defeated itself in that story. That's kind of what I didn't like about it. Everything else was decent, but that was kind of a problem for me. And then Civil War is just a terrible comic. Everyone's acting out of character, and Mark Millar has a really, really hard political agenda that he shoves in your face, and it's just, I don't find it pleasant at all, and a lot of people like it just for the novelty of the superheroes fighting each other, which I can kind of understand, but I just really don't like Civil War at all.
Would you consider that the worst event?
I wouldn't consider it their worst event, because it's actually coherent. Like, you can read Civil War and understand the entire story, but, like, because it's hard, because, like, it depends on how you want to evaluate how good something is, you know what I'm saying?
Because the only event I've read is Secret Invasion. I haven't finished it. I got, like, halfway through it, and I felt that was good.
Really? You like Secret Invasion? You weren't confused at all?
No. Not really. I mean, I was not completely knowing everything that was going on, but I wasn't like I wasn't like going, what? Huh?
One of the main complaints people have with Secret Invasion is that if you didn't read if you read just the core miniseries, then you would have no idea what the hell's happening, because you'd have to read all the tie-ins to get like most of the story.
Okay. Well, I only got to the part where Nick Fury came in.
Okay. I haven't read Secret Invasion, so I don't know, but that's what people tell me.
Okay. I wasn't confused, but I wasn't knowing everything was going on, and I wasn't expecting to, so maybe that's where I have an advantage, because I have been reading a lot of the comics, that I wasn't expecting to understand everything. I was expecting to be lost at certain parts.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair.
Okay. John?
Yo.
Question. Most overrated character.
Comic.
I can't really answer that question because I never read enough comic books to feel like I felt that, so I'm kind of lost on that.
Okay. I'm going to come out and say the only answer I can give is one that I've never read.
Which one?
Deadpool. I take it Dan doesn't disagree with me.
I do not disagree.
Nothing is a bad character, but everyone acts like now that he was kind of butchered in Wolverine, that he's such a great character. Which, yet again, he was butchered in that movie. The beginning of that movie was good, and then turn it off and stop watching it, because that's how you get your enjoyment out of that film. Like I was me and John were talking about that movie yesterday, and I was like that Wolverine's origin is really accurate to one comic book series. And he asked me a question, why do you dislike it? And I said, because the origin part of the film is good. Once you get into the main film, it gets bad.
Right, yeah.
And like, same thing with Deadpool. The beginning, when you first meet him, before he's Deadpool, he's really good. He's the character. But once he gains superpowers, he becomes so removed from that character that he can't be considered that character anymore.
Right, and they kind of did something weird with that, from what I understand, because I don't read Deadpool, because the modern incarnation of Deadpool has made me completely despise that character because for a couple of years, Deadpool would be in every goddamn comic I was reading, and he would go away. So I was like, wow, I never want to read this character ever again. So, from what I understand, from what I've heard from people, is that Wade Wilson wasn't anything like how he is as Deadpool before he was Deadpool. So it's weird in the movie that he is the character, and then when he turns into Deadpool, he's not the character.
Yeah, I've heard that, because if you really want to know how Deadpool is like, go watch Hulk versus Wolverine.
Yeah, that was a pretty good interpretation of Deadpool from what I hear.
Yeah, like that from what I've heard, that's like the best you're going to get on film. And yeah, like there's a line where he's talking about killing babies, and I was laughing. If you can do that in a movie and get me to laugh, you've succeeded at what you're trying to do. Because that is so morbid, it should not be funny.
Yeah, exactly.